The story is from an unknown account. Ex-best friend slept with my ex-GF and blackmailed me, so I got him mocked by his friends and fired from his job. Sorry about the title, not really all that great with them. So I'm a gay man, though it took me a long time to actually come to terms with it. During the time when I was questioning, I was dating who I thought was a lovely girl. I'll call her Jane. I genuinely loved her and pictured us having a future together as we'd been dating for 3 years and had started to get pretty serious, even though we were only 18 when he split us up. You lot know what young love is like. Anyway, the only other important people in this story are my ex-best friend James and my absolutely incredible boyfriend Alex. Not their real names, by the way. Also, this is a long read, so sorry about that. I tend to ramble and I'm not that much of a writer. So sorry if this kind of sucks. James and I had been friends since we were about 10 or 11 and we got close, to the point that we felt more like bothers than best friends. He was really supportive of my relationship with Jane and would constantly talk about how glad he was that she made me happy. Though when I look back on it now, he had a habit of constantly talking about how gorgeous she was, sexy she was, and how I was such a lucky guy. I understand the last one, but he was a bit excessive when he talked about how attractive Jane was, but I was young and naive at the time and didn't think anything of it. That was until I caught them. I'm not much of a writer, but essentially I noticed that they were both becoming pretty possessive over their phones. They'd randomly disappear claiming to be feeling ill or having to get some project done, and I know it sounds stupid, but I kept noticing that the condoms I was buying were going missing. I always liked to make sure we had enough for precautions. I wound up going to Jane's house one day when she'd bailed on me claiming to have a migraine. I was partly worried for her health and brought some painkillers, food, and some bottled water, in case she genuinely did feel ill, but I also had a feeling in the pit of my stomach that she was lying to me. I don't know how to explain it. I just knew. Sure enough, when I let myself in with the spare key she'd given me, I found her in bed with James. I was heartbroken. The two people who I cared about most in the world and who I thought cared about me went behind my back like this. I was furious. We had a major argument. Jane begged me to listen to her, whilst James yelled at me, and I eventually just stormed out. I wanted to go and tell everyone what they'd done and shame them for it. But that's where the problem arose. Remember at the start where I mentioned that I was questioning? James knew about it. Of course he knew I'd never leave Jane to sleep with a bunch of guys, but he was fully aware that I'd figured out that I was attracted to guys and girls. More like just Jane in particular, as I don't really feel any attraction towards girls anymore. And he used this against me. He knew full well how terrified I was that my parents would disown me, and he made sure to remind me that if I didn't keep my mouth shut, then my parents would find out. At the time, this was absolutely terrifying, though I now know that they accept me 100% and still love me. So I kept my mouth shut. I was stuck having to work with James at his father's garage, as I couldn't come up with a way to explain how I was mad at him without letting everyone know what he did and risking getting outed to my parents. Besides, I needed the money, and there weren't a whole lot of other jobs I could apply for. Also, I really should mention that James was going out of his way to harass me at work, calling me a bunch of slurs whenever he got the chance, pushing me around and just generally reminding me that he could tell my parents at any point. I got really low at this point, and the only time I actually felt sort of content to just let myself relax and be myself was when I'd go to the local gay bars. There was one club in particular that I loved to go to, a drag club, where I met my boyfriend Alex. He was a drag queen there and helped out behind the bar and stuff when he was needed. To save any confusion, I'm just going to use he, him pronouns for him, though they do switch when he's in drag. We flirted for a few weeks before gradually becoming friends with benefits. He is amazing, and I know it sounds cheesy, but I was the happiest I'd ever been when he agreed to be my boyfriend. But that's skipping a little bit ahead. This revenge happened before we started dating, and we were still just friends who'd hook up every now and then. After a few months, I finally worked up the courage to open up to Alex about what happened with Jane and James, and that's when an evil look fell over his face. See, Alex is the sweetest guy you could ever meet, but if you piss him off, he can and will turn into an evil genius. Around this time, James had been bragging to me that the ladies loved him, and he could get any girl he wanted. I really doubt that. He'd always been kinda like this, but he upped the bragging in an attempt to annoy me. He also told me how any girl that I dated would leave me in an instant to sleep with him. So Alex suggested we put that to the test. Cue the revenge. We started off small. See, James had given me his email address a few years prior, and just as I'd thought, he couldn't be bothered to change it. So I decided to be very generous and sign him up to a premium subscription to several gay peon websites, and decided to be courteous and agree to receive emails about notifications, new offers, and other things he may be interested in, just to be nice and make sure he had some variety. Oh, did I mention that this was the email address he allowed his father to use? Oops, it cost me a fair bit of money, but I made sure that he got the best offers. Alex was more than happy to chip in to help me. It was worth it. When we were working in the garage and his dad stormed in and asked to speak to him. Now his dad didn't really give a about his kid being gay, but he was mortified that his son would order this much put in their shared email address. He genuinely thought for months that James was addict. We may have signed him up for a bit more than we thought. I logged into the email after the first 2 weeks of him being signed up for the subscriptions, and he had well over 100 emails about his accounts. This is when, like we'd hoped, James started getting more aggressive. He'd barge into me, screw up my work to get me in trouble, and send me disgusting messages, as well as threatening, insulting me in person. I took note of everything. I kept a notepad to log the dates and times of the incidents, and kept a detailed description of everything he did, every insult and every threat. I'd screenshot all the messages from him and record every insult and threat that he'd hurl at me on my phone. Alex helped me organize all of this onto files, and then we saved it all onto a hard drive. This would be important for later. This is when we decided to move on to the next phase of our plan. The girlfriend. And no, not Jane. Also, I should mention that he and Jane split up only a couple of weeks after I found out about the affair. They were never going to last. See, Alex passes extremely well when he's in drag. Being feminine already makes it a bit easier. His voice isn't all that deep, and he can sometimes be mistaken for a girl with a slightly deeper voice. He usually exaggerates his makeup and clothing, but for this phase of the plan, we decided to get him to tone down the makeup slightly to make it appear more natural, and a mutual friend of ours took him aside and gave Alex some of her clothes to wear. We then created a fake Facebook account for my new girlfriend, and Alex and I posted some cute couple photos on this account and my own personal Facebook account, posting all your usual lovey-dove stuff that you see on couples' social media. Then we put our plan into action. Alex would come to pick me up from work a couple days a week, dressed as an extremely beautiful girl, if I do say so myself. We'd chat, hold hands, hug and kiss, and just generally act like a couple. James obviously noticed. He took the bait and began chatting to Alex when he was waiting for me to finish up, and eventually wound up sending him, or our fake account, a friend request, which Alex was all too happy to accept. It took a few weeks, but after a while of just talking about work, school, TV shows and music, James finally started to edge his and Alex's conversations into more territory, which was exactly what we were looking for. Alex answered accordingly. He had tried to send Alex nudes hoping to get some in return, but we deleted those straight away. We thought that would be a little too far, even for this douchebag. This continued for a few weeks until we had everything in place. Alex made sure to screenshot the messages, and then we went ahead and changed the name of the Facebook account to Alex's name and deleted the couple pictures on it. I sent the screenshots of the conversations with Alex to James's friends. They were petty accepting, and usually were the ones to call James out when he was being an asshole, and they took great pleasure in mocking James for it. The look on James's face when his friends mentioned his little boy toy was absolutely priceless. I'm not sure he'll ever live it down. The people he picked on at school even snapped back at him that he's the one who was another guy, so where the hell did he get off calling them a faggot? This pissed him off to no end, as he knew that they were right, even if he hadn't known Alex was a boy at the time. James also had the sort of expected reaction and started sending Alex a bunch of hateful messages and threats, only helping our case as we'd screenshot the messages and add it to the folders on the hard drive. Once I had what we thought was enough evidence, I decided to take it all to James's dad, mine and James's boss, and explained everything that was going on. From the cheating with Jane to the blackmail and threats, he just sat there and listened, allowing me to show him the proof I'd gathered. He did find the petty revenge with Alex in drag petty funny, but the rest of the time, his face was just kind of blank, with a hint of anger in his eyes. He thanked me for the information and went off to speak with his son. James got fired on the spot. I agreed not to go to the police as this could end up with some pretty bad press for his dad's company, and his dad was a pretty cool guy. I knew he was all talk, so there was no real threat of danger. I received an amazing reference from James's dad for a job I desperately wanted and eventually got, no doubt helped by said reference. James's parent flipped out with him. They refused to give him his job back and made him go out and actually put in the effort to get and keep a job. He had gotten used to being able to slack off as his dad owned the place and technically couldn't fire him. They also sold the car they'd been letting him use and told him to pay for a new one with his own money. It took him about 2 years to save up enough money to buy his new car. It all eventually came out about James and Jane's affair. As for the threats of outing me, Alex kindly reminded James that he had absolutely no proof of me doing anything, whilst his friends all knew about the messages James had sent him, another guy. It would look like he was just pointing fingers because of a little petty revenge. James's father had also assured me that my secret was safe with him, so the threats of blackmail were now non-existent. James got into college on a scholarship and started hanging out with a bunch of other douchebags. I found out through a mutual friend that James was still a homophobic prick at college and was terrorizing a couple of LGBT students, as well as making disgusting threats against a lesbian girl in his class. None of them wanted to do anything about this, however. Why? Because James had been lying to them and saying that his dad was one of the higher-ups in the college or something. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention, and I can't remember exactly who he said his father was. But it was enough to make these poor kids worry that they could be kicked out of college for speaking up about this. I decided to lend a helping hand. With the help of our mutual friend, I emailed a bunch of the disgusting screenshots, recordings of some of the threats, and some of the homophobic, racist things he'd posted on his Facebook page, which he had deleted before the college could see them, to the higher-ups in the college. They were not happy with what they saw. They eventually revoked his scholarship after a few of the students, with some encouragement, spoke up about the harassment and threats. I honestly have no clue why he turned out like this. His parents are absolutely lovely, open-minded people. It's crazy. James's parents kicked him out after that. He stayed with his friends for a few months before he managed to get an apartment. Last I heard, he was working in a fast food restaurant, working to get into another college. I genuinely hope he bettered himself and that he can do well in his life. Everyone's capable of change, right? I'd also like to clarify that I didn't care all that much about getting back at Jane because, yes, she did have the affair, but I was getting some revenge on James for the blackmail and threats that came after it. Jane had showed me proof that she'd tried to prevent James from blackmailing me and told him to just let it go. If they'd both just stopped speaking to me after the affair, then this whole thing wouldn't have happened. I'd have been hurt and maybe a little awkward at work, but I wouldn't have gone out of my way to get back at him. Though I did fill Jane's mother in on what actually happened and sent her some screenshots where Jane admitted to the affair. This was after I found out that she had told her mother that I was the one who cheated with a bunch of guys and girls, instead of the "we just grew apart" version that we'd agreed to tell our parents. From what I heard, her mother was not all that pleased with her. I also sent a few of the texts where she admitted to having an affair to her new boyfriend. Needless to say, he wasn't happy to find out that abusive ex, was actually just an ex who she'd cheated on. They're still together from what I heard, so all I can say to that guy is, good luck, my dude. I eventually did end up coming out to my parents, and they were surprisingly supportive, which was amazing. And Alex and I got together a year or two after these events, and we're still very much in love. Sorry if this doesn't count as a pro-revenge, but a couple of friends suggested I post it here. I know there's probably a bunch of spelling mistakes and the story might be a bit all over the place, but I'm not much of a writer, so my apologies. The revenge was perfect, and it was executed brilliantly. Each step humiliated James multiple levels, publicly, personally, and professionally. Bro was destroyed every second. James got a bitter lesson of mean actions. It was really satisfying to see James finally working fast food. Let's start with a very interesting Reddit story from Extra Chaotic Good. Teacher makes false claim of me faking an injury, so my mom messes with her career. I apologize for the format. I'm typing this on my cracked phone screen. I, 15F, have had a long and elaborate history with injuries, especially breaking my arm. Starting from literally the day I was born, my health has been complicated. I have a few conditions, but none serious enough to impact my daily life as I know it. I have a very weak immune system and somewhat easy to break bones. On top of that, I am the definition of clumsy, and I'm also a huge idiot who gets herself into dangerous situations for fun. My mom, 40F, has obviously known me from birth and knows just the extent of my weird bad luck and health issues. I've broken my arms a collective 13 times over my entire life, and almost every time I got injured or sick, it seems somebody had something to say about it. IDKY, but teachers just love to say that students that get hurt often are attention-seeking fakers, and a lot of relationships with authority figures have been harmful because of this. Every time it's the same. For some reason, a teacher doesn't believe me. They call me a liar in front of everyone. I get bullied for a while, and then I have to try and prove that I'm not faking. I could post so many stories about teachers doing this, but this is a story about the time my mom actually managed to get revenge. This all took place around 7th grade. I was 12 at the time, and I had broken my wrist by climbing on top of something I wasn't supposed to, and then falling off like a dumbass. My wrist was in a Velcro cast since I'm very allergic to the regular cast material, as they figured out through many cases of trial and error. My teacher, let's call her Mrs. Tablet, since this took place while we were learning about Egyptian tablets. She taught history, and our personalities clashed a bit. I'm more of a creative, adventurous, free thinker type, and she was very conservative, by the book, and proper. We hadn't had any real issues before this, but we just didn't mesh well. She was absent one day, and we had a sub in. I knew the sub as one of my teacher's friends and one of my bully's mum. I didn't like her, but I was still respectful in class and just tried to get my work done. She got me in trouble for doodling on my paper once or twice, but other than that, everything was fine. Or so I thought. The next day, I went into class like usual. We were working on an assignment about Egypt and their tables when Mrs. Tablet called me over to her desk. I went over, thinking she'd just get on to me for drawing on the back of my homework or something, only to get bombarded with a bunch of really weird questions. The interaction went something like, "Teacher, so Fire, do you know why I've called you up here? I know Fire isn't my Reddit name, but it's my IRL nickname, so I'm using it here." Me, "No ma'am, I can't say that I do." Teacher, "How long have you had that cast?" Me, "About a week now." Why? Teacher, "Do you really need that cast?" Me, yes? Teacher, "Well, the substitute told me she saw you take it off." Me, "It's a cast. I can't take it off. It would hurt." Teacher, "So if I asked the class, they'd say, you need that cast." Me, "Yes." Teacher, "And if I called your parents right now, they'd say the same thing." Me, "Yes, they were the ones who took me to the hospital. And she did this in front of the whole class." I was eventually dismissed, and people looked at me weird for the rest of class. As I later learned, apparently the substitute had told Mrs. Tablet that I'd taken off my cast as soon as I left class. I didn't. And that I threw it in my locker like, ha 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 ha, I'm getting away with doing less work. So basically, she pretended I was a bad guy in a crappy high school movie. IDK why she said this, but it had my teacher convinced that I was a liar and a fake. I technically could remove my cast since it was Velcro, but that would have been extremely painful, and it's not like I could just walk around without it. I wasn't going to make a big deal about it at the time, but it turns out she was serious about calling my parents. But she made the mistake of calling my mom. Now, me and my mother don't have a perfect relationship. She has anger issues, so we don't always get along well. But she loves me very much and doesn't let people like this mess with me if she can stop it. According to my mom, Mrs. Tablet called her all cocky and said things like, "Apparently your daughter is wearing a cast. Did you know that?" And, well, we all know how dramatic teenage girls can be, especially unique kids like her. She apparently even threatened to have me suspended before my mom stopped her and tore her to shreds for talking about her child like that. I don't think I'm allowed to repeat what was said, but by the end, Mrs. Tablet had to retreat with her tail tucked between her legs. She started being even more cold to me after that day and started giving me unfair detentions for not sitting still and doodling on the side of my worksheets. Even then, outside of school, we went to the same art studio sometimes. Weird that someone who hates art so much likes to paint. And poisoned the art director against me and got me put into a lower class. When me mom found out about this, she started the real revenge. My mom has never been a PTA mom. She honestly can't stand most of the PTA members, and their kids are chosen as favourites at my school and use this power to bully others, including me and my friends. My mom is, however, friends with a very lovely woman on the county school board, which has more power than the PTA. She told her friend everything that had happened and supplied all the doctor's notes needed to prove I needed my cast. Her friend managed to convince the rest of the board that Mrs. Tablet was discriminating against an impaired student, given her comments about me being slower at work and just wearing the cast to slack off, along with detentions related to me not sitting still when she knew I had nervous movements and slight ADHD. At the art studio, my mother pulled me from the classes. I took it upon myself to inform the fellow kids about why, and rumours spread quickly. Soon enough, kids were getting pulled left and right, and my art teacher was pulling at strings to try and get the situation under control. I actually think the studio went into temporary closure before reopening again. She was suspended for a week to go under investigation, and it turns out she treated a lot of the unique, as she put it, students in a similar way. She was verbally reprimanded by 2 different departments, and instead of getting her standard raise over the next 3 years, she'll only get half of that. Not only that, but she had to retake a course on how to properly treat students, and if she's ever caught to cross this line again, she'll lose tenure. She'll just be getting her bonus back at the start of next school year, and I'd just like to say that I hope she learned her lesson. Tal. DR. Teacher claims I'm faking my broken wrist. Calls my mom. My mom calls her friend at the county school board and gets her suspended for discrimination and gets unfair art program temporarily closed. Edit. I had misremembered the punishment given to that teacher. Upon asking my mom to retell the story, I fixed it to make it accurate. Thank you to the Redditor that pointed out the mistake. I suppose that my 12-year-old self remembered a raise as a bonus for some reason. The revenge was satisfyingly perfect, executed with precision. The teacher deserved to be humiliated and stripped of his reputation. It was truly a career-destroying revenge. Such toxic teachers deserve the same fate. The next story is from Earth Rogue. Veteran mechanic taking advantage of active duty military and retirees, messes with the wrong person, and his buddy goes down with him. When this started, all I was trying to do was get out of paying for something I didn't need and never asked for. By the end, I was going for blood as someone else enacted their revenge. I posted this over in r/military stories, and after a couple comments realised it belongs here too. I'm adding some edits to give context for those without military experience. This happened back in 2002 on Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. I was stationed down the way at 32nd Street Naval Base for my Military Occupation Specialty School and was a new Lance Corporal, E3 at the time. I had a 1994 Dodge Spirit with 180k miles or so, and I'd just driven it across the country. I bought it a few days before leaving KS at an auto auction. A couple weeks into my school, it died. At the gate, next to the sentry. After an initial freak out that I was a suicide bomber, and the subsequent search of me and my car, everyone calms down and they help push my car to the top of the hill so I can coast down the other side and into the auto repair shop parking lot, which thankfully went without incident. Before I go in, I call my dad and then his cousin. My dad knows a ton about cars, and his cousin is a mechanic with his own very successful shop, like a dozen work bays, and they handle everything from regular cars to farm equipment to semis. I know a fair bit about cars on my own, but he knows everything. Between us, we decide it looks like the distributor or the distributor cap is the issue. My dad's cousin says it's a common issue on spirits from this time and recommends I get it fixed here by a real mechanic. Now at this point, it's important to note his shop did a very thorough once-over for me after I bought the car and gave me good notes on the condition of the car in writing, from his shop. I go in and talk to the guy at the counter. They're not too busy and pull it into a bay and run their diagnostics. Same thing. Distributor cap. Cool. I get the services agreement saying they'll replace it and call me if they find anything else. I hear nothing until the end of the week when they call and say my car's ready. When I get there, they present me with a bill for like $1,400. Wow. Just wow. Now my heart has stopped beating and I say something about that being a lot for a distributor cap. The guy who owns the place, I find out he's a veteran from way back, breaks off talking to a Master Sergeant, MSGT E8, and comes over to talk to me. He starts telling me about how it was much worse than they originally thought, and they ended up having to replace my radiator, plus hoses, and my timing belt and a head gasket. I'm still in shock and say something like the head gasket was fine 2 weeks ago, and so was the radiator and the timing. He puts his hand on my shoulder and tells me I don't know what I'm talking about, because they've been waiting to fail for a long time now. I'm confused now and say that's not possible. I bought it 2 weeks ago and he cuts me off and says I was sold a complete lemon and I should have had it checked. He says he felt bad for me and this should have cost over $2,000, but he cut me a deal and he can work with me in an installment plan, but will have to charge me interest. Now I'm suspicious and starting to get pissed, and I say the only repair I authorized was a distributor cap, and they should have called me before doing anything else. And I start to explain I've got paperwork from the inspection I'd done that said those other things were fine. I'm going to get it from the car, and the MSGT grabs me by the arm and starts telling me I'm being ungrateful and disrespectful to a respected mechanic and business owner, and asks me if I'm implying he's cheating me. Every time I try to open my mouth, he cuts me off and keeps telling the owner not to worry. He'll make sure this young pup pays what is owed. He's threatening to take me over to admin and have my pay docked. Now, I'm angry and a bit scared. Another Marine intervenes and says, that's a little extreme, and to let me say my piece. I get permission to get into my car, to get my maintenance history, which includes an oil change, the inspection documentation, and the original quote for the distributor cap work. At this point, there's a crowd of customers and some other passers-by. The owner of the garage and MSGT are in full theatre mode, talking about how I'm not appreciating the huge help they've been, and I'm trying to get out of paying for work I asked for. Now, I'm mostly just pissed. I come in, and the MSGT cuts me off and tells me to be careful how I talk to his friend. I ask the MSGT if he's going to let me speak or keep interrupting me while I'm in a private conversation with a business owner. I ask him if he owns part of the shop. No. And ask why he's so interested in not hearing a Marine out. Then I get out the original statement of services and say the distributor cap is all I agreed to. I also ask why he didn't call me, and he says he called my barracks several times and left messages including ones telling me the car was undrivable until the repairs were made, so he went with the lowest cost option to get me back on the road. Oops. I say, that's interesting. The only number I gave you is my cell phone, and I don't have any messages or even attempted calls until the previous evening when they left a message that my car was ready. I show everyone my call history, including a captain who's very interested and standing quietly by. The MSGT has backed off, and the captie is quietly talking to him off on the side. Now the owner is backpedaling a bit and saying he was thinking of a different customer, but he's already made the replacement and has to charge me for the work. Then I pull out the stuff from the inspection and it has some fun little statements in it. Statements like, timing belt good, timing good. Check again in 30k miles. Radiator appears to be recently replaced. All hoses new in last 6 months. Nothing on the head gasket, but there's a statement that there are no leaks in that area, which was why he said he had to replace it. I say he can put all of my original stuff back on, because all I'm paying for is the distributor cap work. He gets red-faced and starts demanding I pay for the labour, and he can't put things back on because they were too badly damaged in the removal process. Now some old retired guy chimes in from the back and asks, what kind of mechanic damages things when they take them apart? The owner drags out my radiator, and there is a giant hole in one side that looks like it was stabbed with a crowbar. Now a couple other people, locals, are questioning past situations where he helped them out with repairs they didn't know they needed. The MSGT tried to walk off, and a colonel and a sergeant major in civilian attire post him to the side for a later conversation. The cap pulls me aside and asks to see the info I have, and to see my phone again, and steps behind the counter to photocopy it all. He has a truly evil grin. Turns out he's a prior enlisted former infantry marine who became an officer after going back to college. He has suspected this shop of being crooked for a while, but never had enough proof. He's on the commanding general's staff, and they were looking into complaints from permanent personnel and retirees in the area. The owner is sweating bullets now. I only pay for the distributor cap and get a statement that says my balance is 0, so he doesn't try anything in the future. The capt takes me to dinner and gets my info, and basically a statement from me of what happened. After dinner, he takes me back to his office while he types up something for me to sign about the whole incident, and I call Verizon to get them to fax over the incoming outgoing calls from my number from the past week. He explains that the MSGT has been steering a lot of customers to his buddy, and they suspect he's getting kickbacks. The capt and several others have been taking their cars there for months to try to catch the guy doing what he did to me. The MSGT sealed his fate when he started threatening to take my pay. They suspected he was getting kickbacks or favors in exchange for hooking up his buddy. Now he has the justification he needs to formally look into the MSGT. The capt was thrilled and bought me a 6-pack for using up so much of my Friday evening. I wasn't around long enough to see the outcome, but when I left, there were auditors from base services going through the business with a fine-tooth comb, and it was a legal matter. Once something like that gets started, it probably means a business, and the owners will get kicked out of the on-base location. The base owns the building, and the owner leases it. He and his business would also end up blacklisted as a place known for taking advantage of service members. Most commands give this out to people who check in, so no one patronizes them. It still boggles my mind that one veteran would try to use that status to take advantage of others, or that a senior Marine would do that to other Marines. I know there are people out there like that, but having the shared common background we do, I expect better. Edit. Yeah, that last paragraph sounds naive. Just wishful thinking in my part. There are good and bad people everywhere in life, and the military is no different. Edit 2. This post really seems to have resonated, and that makes me happy. Thanks for all the comments and messages, and thanks for the awards. The revenge was really perfect and was impeccably executed. By exposing the fraudulent mechanic and his enabler, the Master Sergeant, OP not only saved himself, but likely protected countless others from similar scams. The revenge was really satisfying and cool.